Hey, this is Melissa Muir, and we're going to do another Tool Time Tuesday. And really quickly, I wanted to show a simple thing that there's a lot of videos out there, but one of my friends requested that I make a real quick video, so I thought I would. And I'm just going to show you how really quickly to solder a nice little silver band. I mean, this could work for copper or brass as well, but I have silver. So what I've done is I have my piece here that's completely out of focus. But anyway, I have a piece here that I've already made, and what I like to do with mine is I will form them kind of into a D shape, and this allows it so that I'm able to get a nice flat join. If I can show you here, maybe not, there it goes. I want a nice flat join here on the back where we've got a solid join where the metal meets together perfectly. You want to make sure that there are no gaps. Solder will not fill gaps, so you want to make certain that you've got a good join that you can then solder together. So I'll put it with that flat side down, and I'm going to place my piece of solder into here. But there's a few other things that we need to do first. So first thing we need to do to make the solder flow is to keep our metal clean. The solder will not flow into a dirty area. So what we do is I use some flux, and this is just one kind that you can buy. It's a handy flux. It is different than what you buy for plumbers, so don't think that you can just buy plumber's solder or plumber's flux and it'll work, because it won't. It'll just make a mess. I happen to be the queen of flux, so I flux everything. And what I'm going to do is just paint this on. Now what flux does is it kind of helps absorb some of the oxidation that's going to happen as you're working with sterling silver. Oxidation is a form of dirt, so if we get oxidation in there, then our solder is not going to flow. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up my solder pallions. I've already cut up some of these. It started out as a sheet of metal, and I just took my scissors and basically cut kind of like a grass skirt that we used to do on the construction paper when we were a kid. And then you go back through and cut along those, and you end up with your little squares of solder pallions. Now, you'll notice that my solder has black on it. This is something that I do personally, is I color code my solder. So if I happen to find a little black square sitting on my board, I know that this is hard solder. For me, if I find a red square, then it's medium solder. If I find just a little silver square, then it's easy. And if I find green, then it's extra easy. Again, this is just my own personal method, but you know, it's something that makes it kind of easy for me. So what I've done now is I've placed my solder here just in the base right on the join so it touches both sides. Okay, a couple of other tools that I need in order to successfully solder this ring. One, I need a torch. In this case, I'm using what's called a jumbo torch. It's a butane torch. I like this one because I'm able to get a little larger flame, a little bushier, and it also, because of the larger flame, it makes things go a little quicker. I happen to hold my torch in my non-dominant hand, and I hold my pick, my soldering pick, in my dominant hand. This becomes my fingers. I don't want to go near this with my fingers because that's going to be really hot. And believe me, you only have to burn yourself once or twice before you realize that's not a good idea. So we have the soldering pick. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and light my torch. I want to come in and start very gently to just kind of go around my piece. Now you'll see that it gets kind of this powdery look to it. That's the flux. Flux goes through 3 stages before your solder flows. One, we go into what I call the powdered sugar phase. And then as we continue to warm this, now notice that my torch continually moves. You always want to keep this torch moving. So the next phase of our flux is going to be what I call maple syrup. It goes brown and gooey, and then from there it will go clear and glassy. Once we hit that clear and glassy phase, our solder will begin to flow, and you'll see here really quickly, the solder is now at that melting point. It looks kind of a little bit like mercury. I'm just going to kind of guide it, help guide it into that seam with my pick. And at this point, it's done. You saw that my metal was getting a little bit red. You want to be very careful with silver, because silver, once it gets red, the next stage is molten, and that's when you've liquefied your silver and you risk meltdown. Okay, so I've left my piece on my board a little too long and it is now stuck to my board. I don't want to pull this off or pry this off because if I do, it brings chunks of board with it. So if ever your piece gets stuck to a board or whatever else because of the flux, and that's what's happened is the flux solidified and it's basically gone into a glass state. What I do is I'll just heat my piece up a little bit, okay, and the board until it moves freely. Then I can kind of knock it over, knock it out of the way, and you'll see that this still picked up a little bit of the board here. And I can go ahead and warm this up and wipe it off. Okay, it might take you a couple passes at this. Okay, and then from here you want to quench this. Never quench when it's red hot, but we're going to bring it over into and it's just a bowl of water. Quench that. Once you've heard that psh, and you've dumped the entire piece, it is now safe to hold in your hands. You'll see now that we've got all this yucky, ucky oxidation. Ucky? There's a new word for you. But anyway, so now we're oxidized and we want to remove this. And I'm going to put this in a pickle solution. The pickle solution that I use is just a swimming pool chemical called pH Down. I keep it in a crock pot that's filthy right now. But what I do is you always want to make certain that you open the crock pot away from you. You can go ahead and drop your piece in there. Depending on the strength of your solution and how fresh it is, it will take anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 minutes to remove that oxidation. Warm pickle will remove your oxidation sooner. Alright, once it's done pickling, you want to neutralize the acid. So you just move it into a container that's got baking soda and water. Now, as far as mixing up my pickle or my neutralizing solution, what I do is I fill my crock pot anywhere from 2 to 4 inches with water, and then I'll start off with like maybe 3 to 4 tablespoons of the pickle, in my case again the pH Down, and I just keep adding it until it doesn't dissolve anymore. So, and then the same thing with our baking soda and water. So now at this point my ring is pickled. I'm now going to put this onto a ring mandrel, I can't talk, and shape this. Alright, so I just have a regular standard English mandrel, US measurements, and now I have my ring. What I want to do is I'm going to place this onto my mandrel, and what I do here is I hit the air. I want to hit those air pockets out. Okay, and I'm just going to push it down and continue in this manner until I round this ring back out. Now I'm using a rawhide mallet. I don't want to use a steel hammer because if I use a steel hammer, one, it's going to leave marks in my silver, and two, it's going to stretch my ring, and I don't want to stretch it. I just want to form it back into a ring, you know, so that it's perfectly cylindrical. Okay, because my mandrel is tapered, I'm going to pull this off, twist it around, and then do the same thing again and just work my way around the ring. Okay, until I'm left with a round ring, and I check here and I don't want to see any of these little bumps sticking out on the mandrel, and now I'm left with a round ring. Next step is I need to clean up the seam, both inside and out, and because I sawed this by hand with a saw frame, I also need to flatten the both ends of my pieces so that I'm left with a flat ring. What I like to do here is once I've got my ring rounded, it brings that seam up to a ridge, and then I can just work with my file right along that ridge, and you can actually see where your file begins to remove the metal. So I'm just going to very carefully, and I'm not pushing hard at all, okay, and just use the length of the file. You can see that the seam is beginning to disappear. I have one little edge right here that needs to have a little bit more effort or a little bit of work there. And once I see that go away, I can also flip this around and do it from the opposite direction just to make sure that we have it the way we need to. Alright, and at that point my seam is now gone, and I can begin to file the edges of my ring to make them flat. Files cut only in one direction. So what I do is I set my ring on the file, and then I pull in the direction that the file cuts, and I will turn the ring. So I'll set it down, give it a twist, do it again, set it down, give it a twist, and just file until I get the nice smooth ends. And you can see where we've got some of that powdered look, and you can see where the file has actually removed some of the metal. And I just continue to do this on both sides until I'm happy with the surface that I have. Alright, here's a little trick I'm going to show you that I use to darken in my letters without having to do the whole liver of sulfur thing. I just take a Sharpie, and you want to make sure that you really get that Sharpie pushed way in there. Okay, and this also works best, obviously, if you have good deep impressions with your stamping. In this case, I used a stamp, but it works still the same if you have done something with etching or anything like that. So what I do after I've done this is I'll just take a small polishing pad that I have and kind of remove it from just the surface here. Okay, this is just a soft little polishing buffing cloth that I have, and you can see that I've used it quite a bit. And what I do is I just run right along the surface, and it's going to remove that Sharpie only on the surface here, and I'll be left with my text very dark. And that's the one thing I really like about doing the Sharpie method, is that I've got a nice deep black text, whereas if I did this with liver of sulfur, it would just be more of kind of a dark gray. Okay, and this will make my ring have a higher polish as well. So I'll just take a couple more seconds here, finish this off, and I now have a finished ring with my text.